From Herb Dean nearly letting Francisco Trinaldo kill Jai Herbert, to Todd Anderson costing Holly Holm her title. These are the worst referee calls that ruined MMA fights. Sometimes even the best officials allow fighters to get seriously injured. One such incident happened during UFC Fight Island 3 in 2020. Trinaldo was fighting Herbert on the prelim card, and the legendary UFC ref Herb Dean was officiating the match. The veteran official is considered to be one of the best in the business, but it was just not his night. You see, Herbert was dropped early in the third round, and it was pretty clear that he couldn't continue. He may have even been unconscious there for a second, but Dean didn't see that. In fact, he allowed Trinaldo to rain bombs on his opponent and only stepped in after what seemed like ages. What's more was that the commentary team of Dan Hardy and Paul Felder were screaming their heads off. They wanted the ref to stop the fight as soon as Herbert went to the ground, but as I said, it took Dean some time to register what had happened. Hardy was particularly furious with the seasoned official, and he even gave him an earful as Herb was leaving the octagon. This isn't the first time something like this happened, and it certainly won't be the last. Plus, something similar happened not so long ago in Fury FC 76. When Yanni Vasquez was up against Edgar Chairez. The fourth round into the fight, Vasquez found himself in a triangle choke, and the referee, Frank Collazo, failed to see that he couldn't take it anymore. Yanni's body went limp as he passed out on the canvas, but the official refused to call the fight. Much like Hardy and Felder, the casters here were also shouting at Frank to stop the match. Even the doctor could be heard begging him to do his job. To make matters worse, Chairez didn't even realize what was happening. He thought his choke wasn't working, so he transitioned to an armbar, and he almost broke Vasquez's arm. Yanni couldn't even tap at first because he was out cold. Luckily for him, he regained enough consciousness to tap out just in time before Edgar splintered his arm in two. This was one of the most horrible pieces of officiating that I've ever seen. I know their job isn't easy, but sometimes they allow the fight to go on for too long, and sometimes they're too quick to jump the gun. Drew Dober was facing Leandro Silva at UFC Fight Night 62 in 2015. The fight was pretty back and forth until the ref Eduardo Hurdy decided to leave his mark on it. In the second round, Silva was attacking from the ground as he found a guillotine around Dober's neck. Drew was doing everything right to defend the choke. He threw his legs over to the side to release some of the pressure, and the ref was even checking his arm to see if he was still in the fight. Dober was very conscious of what was happening and was even very intelligently defending himself. But for some reason, Hurdy thought that he'd seen enough and decided to stop the fight even though Dober was still clearly in it. Dana White was furious with this decision, and he had it overturned by the Athletic Commission to a no contest due to an error in the referee's judgment. It just showed how inexperienced Hurdy was as an official. This reminds me of another referee who had no idea what he was doing inside the octagon, Vyacheslav Kieselev. The man who was supposed to overlook the fight between Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos and Benoit Saint-Denis at UFC 267. After the first round, it was very clear that the newcomer Saint-Denis was way out of his depth. And he couldn't last long against dos Santos, who began to open up against Denis in the second round, and the Frenchman could do nothing more than cover up. Surprisingly, Kieselev allowed the fight to continue for some reason, and Denis somehow survived the onslaught, but things got worse in the third round. Dos Santos eye-poked the newcomer, due to which Saint-Denis couldn't really see anything. The ref called a timeout, but he refused to call a doctor in the octagon even though Benoit was pleading with him to do so. The fight somehow went the distance, but Kieselev's decision during that match left everyone in the arena horrified and fearful for the Frenchman's health. Needless to say, the UFC wasn't impressed with the inexperienced referee, and thankfully decided to remove him from any other officiating duties that very night. That was probably the last time he worked at any UFC event. Speaking of which, let me tell you guys of another referee banned by the UFC, Steve Mazzagatti. Now this legend has ruined more fights than the rest of the guys on this list combined. He probably deserves his very own video on the worst calls. And the best part is that he was never inexperienced when he made these bad calls. You guys probably remember John Jones's only loss to a controversial disqualification, right? The man responsible for that was this guy. John was fighting Matt Hamill, who was supposed to be his biggest challenge back then. But Bones, being who he is, was completely ragdolling Hamill and got an early full mount. From there, John started landing huge punches and elbows. Matt was out of it completely, and the fight should have been stopped right there. But for reasons unknown, Mazzagatti allowed the fight to continue until John threw what looked like an illegal elbow. This was the moment that the legendary referee decided to step in and took a point from John. After that, he verbally asked Hamill if he was hurt. The Hammer, being born deaf, obviously couldn't respond, so Mazzagatti waved the fight off. Everyone thought it was in John's favor, but here the official decided to throw in another twist. He actually disqualified Jones for the illegal elbows, and the Athletic Commission never changed the decision either. This kind of thing was pretty common in the UFC back then, cause Mario Yamasaki made a similar decision a few years later. Carlo Prater was fighting Eric Silva at UFC 142, and these two were lucky enough to get Yamasaki to officiate their match. It looked like an easy day at the office for Silva, as he caught Prater early and went on to TKO him in less than 30 seconds into the fight. But that wasn't the case. You see, Mario may have waved off the fight, but it was for another reason. He thought that Prater was knocked out due to strikes at the back of the head by Silva, so he decided to disqualify the young Brazilian. Minutes later, Joe Rogan confronted Yamasaki and forced him to watch the replay of the call he made, which clearly showed that there were no strikes to the back of Prater's head. The decision was never overturned and stands to this day. Yamasaki never even owned his mistake, which would have helped him save some face. He should have taken a page out of Jason Herzog's book, who was in charge of the bout between Anthony Smith and Glover Teixeira at UFC Fight Night 171. Now, Herzog's one of the staples of the promotion. He's a great referee and is often selected to officiate some of the most important matches, but he really dropped the ball that night. The fight started out evenly between the two heavyweights and they were both duking it out. The second round saw Smith really get hurt, but he was given the chance to recover a little as the bell rang. What followed was nothing short of a massacre. Teixeira went on to beat Lionheart to a bloody pulp for 2 more rounds, and Herzog only stepped in to wave it off a minute into the final round. Smith's face was broken and he even lost a few teeth. Many blame his corner for not throwing in the towel, but the truth is that Herzog allowed the one-sided affair to continue for 11 more minutes than he had to. At least he took to Instagram soon after to accept his mistake, which was probably the best he could do at that point. Making split-second calls in a high-stakes fight is never easy, but referees should be taking responsibility for their actions, especially if they cost someone their title. You see guys, Holly Holm's fight against Germaine de Randamie for the inaugural women's featherweight belt suffered a similar fate, and the veteran Todd Anderson was officiating the match. As the first round ended, GDR threw a late punch at Holly which really hurt her, but instead of taking away a point for that, Anderson let Randamie off with just a warning. The Dutch fighter wasn't listening to him though, cause she threw another couple of punches after the second round ended as well. This damaged Holm big time, and since the ref had already warned GDR, he should have taken away a point now, right? But he didn't. He just gave her another warning. At this point, everyone was calling for Anderson to deduct a point, but that never happened. And GDR went on to secure a unanimous decision win over the Preacher's Daughter. Ironically, the difference in judges' scorecards was only 1 point. Holly tried contesting the decision, but the Athletic Commission denied the motion and she lost the belt that should have been hers. So, from costing Holly Holm her title, to almost allowing a fighter to kill a guy in the octagon. Those were the worst referee calls that ruined MMA fights.